The Nigerian government has announced plans to ramp up domestic financing for health programs as changes in U.S. foreign aid policies continue to reshape global assistance. This was made known at the first meeting of the Federal Executive Council for the year 2025, chaired by President Bola Tinubu. In addition, key infrastructure projects, including multi-billion-naira investments in road construction and bridge repairs, were approved. Before the commencement, the President administered the office to 8 newly appointed permanent secretaries and members of various government bodies, including the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, RMAFC. State House correspondent Adesua Omoran reports.
The administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a freeze on almost all new funding for foreign assistance programs, with exceptions for allies Israel and Egypt. The order from the U.S. State Department on Friday also includes exemptions for emergency food programs, but not health programs that supporters say provide vital, life-saving services. In response, the Nigerian government has announced plans to ramp up domestic financing to sustain its treatment programs. In a major step, a 4.8 billion naira allocation for the Presidential AIDS Treatment Program has been approved by the Federal Executive Council.
The Presidential Treatment Program for HIV patients, 150,000 treatment packs, total of 4.8 billion naira to be delivered over 4 months. That is an important statement that the federal government is making to ensure that those who are already HIV infected, even though we have partners that are supporting the treatment, but federal government is already putting its resources to contribute. And we see that that is a signal that the support that the government is providing to those who are vulnerable to reduce the cost and to ensure that life-saving treatment is available.
The Council also approved the establishment of a committee that will manage the transition as U.S. aid policies continue to shift.
While we significantly appreciate all the contribution of the U.S. government over the last 20 years, and we continue to look forward to a constructive partnership with the U.S. government in the period ahead. Nigerian government under the president is looking towards transforming the sector that is nationally owned, using national systems and using domestic financing as well as other sources of financing to ensure that those who are on treatment do not lose the treatment that they are already on. And accordingly, Council agreed that a committee comprising the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Budget, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Environment, as well as the Governors Forum, to start looking at the transition and sustainability planning.
Additionally, the Federal Executive Council endorsed $1.57 billion in financing from the World Bank on their new program known as HOPE. This funding aims to improve healthcare governance and strengthen primary healthcare services across Nigeria. On infrastructure, the Council approved several major projects totaling about 2.8 trillion naira in the Ministry of Works, including pushing ahead with the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway to begin the Calabar-Akwa Ibom sections, as well as evaluations on the Kata and Third Mainland bridges.
We decided as a responsive ministry to, check all the piles, inside the water in Third Mainland Bridge and the Kata Bridge so that we can devise solution to stop, further decay of the piles. And that is for 3.571 billion. That to investigate, that to, give us report, and that to design the remedies. Mr. President graciously directed that, why the sections 1 and 2 are going on within Lagos, section 1 Lagos and section 2 Lagos to the boundary of Ogun State, that we should start another section in Calabar and Akwa Ibom. And that's what we have done, and it's about 65 kilometers by 2 dualized. We also have 6 projects totaling 102 billion under one memo. The 4th project is a total of 10 projects. And graciously, the famous Second Niger Bridge, the access road to the Second Niger Bridge being an issue. But today, FEC approved the Second Niger Bridge, the access road. There's one in Delta, 479 billion, is to be done with concrete. And there is one in Anambra State, is to be done with concrete, 448 billion.
Another significant approval was the establishment of a Creative and Tourism Infrastructure Corporation aimed at boosting the country's creative economy and tourism sectors.
The real key objectives of this CTIC is to provide the infrastructural foundation that is needed for the creative industry and for the tourism industry, and to generate at least $100 billion to the increase of the GDP and at least 2 million jobs, specifically for a younger demographic.
The meeting also reviewed several other memos, with more expected to be discussed and either approved or deferred at the next scheduled Federal Executive Council meeting, which is tomorrow, that is Tuesday. According to the Minister of Information and National Orientation, the President is committed to swiftly addressing these issues after the resumption of Council following a 7-week recess for the Yuletide. From the Presidential Villa, Adesua Omoruan, Arise News.
Right, a lot to get through following the FEC meeting yesterday in Abuja, but very importantly, we've been talking about the impact of Trump's policy on PEPFAR with freezing funds and how we're going to respond to HIV/AIDS in Nigeria. It's great to see the presidency's response. What's your take on this story, Rufai?
So when Trump started those freezing, obviously we know those projects like USAID were soft power projects by Americans in the 60s. I mean, a very bullish American president, then President Kennedy, pretty much started USAID in '61. He also started Peace Corps. These were things to be able to extend to other parts of the world, cultural exchanges, also helping people, and America doing good around the world. And that's why a lot of people worldwide was indebted to Kennedy. He was a global celebrity before he passed. Once Trump started the cuts, and you can see what's even happening in America, that there are protests as regards, stopping of funding to USAID. In fact, some senators are saying they're going to block Trump's nominees, because of that. But once Trump stopped that, then we had to bridge the gap with something called Project Hope. We are putting about over $4 billion, towards HIV treatment, which the bulk of money will also go to awareness and antiretrovirals, which is very important because most of the people get heavily subsidized antiretrovirals. Because the very first cry you hear a lot of people that are suffering HIV/AIDS say is, okay, how are we going to get antiretrovirals? PEPFAR, a couple of years ago, over 20 years ago now, when President Bush announced PEPFAR, over the years, it has spent billions and billions of naira for most African countries to fight HIV/AIDS and, a couple of other diseases. So now that we are trying to bridge the gap, hopefully, I just pray that that money will be released under this thing called Project Hope. Because if you remember, when the Minister of Health was defending his budget, he talked about the fact that out of over 200 billion for capital expense, it was just over 20 billion that was released to him. Secondly, we talked about here the coastal road. So Minister Omari has finally confirmed that the coastal road is actually in the budget. Yeah. Because we combed through the budget, we didn't see it, and he said it was a topographical level. And he said about over 1 trillion is added to that. There's been some advances. So they will also start building from the Calabar-Akwa Ibom axis, to be able to gain some ground also here, about 130 kilometers of that, of dual carriageway. That's also on point. And then he also talked about the back and forth as regards, the contract with Julius Berger that was suspended and that was reviewed. And he said, more parts will be added to that contract, and he said it's not a fictitious company. If you remember, Daily Trust, this printed story where they talked about that they went to a certain address and he said they made a mistake as regards that address. So I think pretty much these are some of the normative issues here. All right, Dr. Abatim.
Okay, now FEC meeting. And then 3 ministers giving us a briefing. The Minister of Health talking about Nigeria's commitment to continue the funding of HIV/AIDS care, which is a major problem, not just in Nigeria, but in other parts of the world. Now, the reference, this is a reaction to the United States, shutting down the United States aid development program that has been in place for 6 decades. The USAID funds projects in Afghanistan, in Uganda, in other parts of the world, including South Africa and Nigeria. And now with Elon Musk emerging as a new branch of government, that USAID has been shut down, and it has the support of President, Joe Biden. What it means is that the countries that are affected will have to look inwards. And I think it's only just appropriate that the Federal Executive Council of Nigeria is saying, we are making arrangements, to provide funding within the health sector for the various programs being supported by international aid. And this is consistent with Vice President Kashim Shettima having said in Davos, Switzerland, that what Africa needs is not even aid. What it needs is partnership or cooperation. And my position is that whether it is in South Africa or Kenya or Nigeria, African countries must begin to look inwards. The position of the United States in the health sector and other sectors must become a wake-up call for African leaders to become more transparent, responsible, and accountable. Now, as for the roads, it's not about only the Lagos-Calabar coastal highway. There are other roads that the FEC committed itself to: Abuja-Kano, East-West Road, Onitsha-Owerri Expressway, the access road from Benin to the east, Obajana Road, Ado-Ekiti Gede Road, and all of that. Total of it, billions of money, and including FCT roads. We now have 4.2 trillion total. The key point that Senator Umahi, Governor Umahi made is that this will boost productivity, it will create jobs, it will address the long age problem of roads needing a rehabilitation, broken down roads, particularly in the eastern part of the country, Onitsha to Owerri, for example, and other roads like that. Okay, so Nigerians have always complained about infrastructure. If the roads are bad, the tankers will collapse. There will be accidents. There will be issues on the roads. So in terms of theoretical commitment that will put more money in this sector and rehabilitate the roads and build new roads, that also makes sense. The third thing that makes sense is a commitment to the culture and tourism sector. Anatu Musawa was shown speaking, and she was saying, look, this sector is very critical and it can generate up to 100 billion. So in terms of the details, I think the Federal Executive Council, hit the right buttons. However, what Nigerians have experienced is that the Federal Executive Council, or the Executive Council of the Federation, which is its technical name, is always quick to say, oh, we are awarding this, we are awarding this, turning almost the FEC meeting into a project awarding meeting. And then the most embarrassing thing that we get is what we saw after the 2024 report on budget performance, that in 2024 budget performance was 43%. Now, this is the question. Why do we make all these commitments and we don't see result? Why do we allocate all this money? It's nice to say we have allocated 4-point-something trillion. We have allocated high about performance. The true taste of the pudding, they say, is in the eating. We would like to see across Nigeria, in terms of the commitments that have been expressed, performance. We would like to see transparency and accountability, not rhetoric. A lot of rhetoric that can inspire hope, that can get people excited, but that is not enough. It's budget performance that is important.
All right, talking about budget performance, when the U.S. president, newly sworn in U.S. president, was sworn in and he announced cuts to funding to USAID, as well as PEPFAR in particular, because of their significant impact and contributions to the fight, or at least managing HIV and AIDS on the African continent and other parts of the world, it was a cause for concern. A lot of people had come out with articles, analysis of how this would potentially affect Nigeria in particular, that has a population of 1.8 million people living with the disease. In fact, about 900,000 children in Nigeria live with HIV, and 15,000 are born with the virus each year. According to report, a lot of the factor behind this is the gap in prevention. And this is why, if you recall, Senator Kashim Shettima had said, I believe it was when he was speaking in Davos, about the impact of AIDS to nations like Nigeria. The truth is that when you have AIDS or a reliant on aid, there is a derelict of functions or responsibility. We tend to give up that responsibility or oversight function because we are expecting the annual amount of money that comes each year. According to USAID's website, 11 million averagely is given to Nigeria annually for the fight against HIV and AIDS. This is funding that would be lost. Already the current budget cycle, at least what is being proposed, does not make provision adequately for healthcare management, with just about 5.7% of that budget going to the health ministry. And now add the burden of foreign aid removed from that. You can imagine the immense pressure on the budget. And so we must now begin to rethink how we do things. Number one is that maxim, prevention is better than cure. We will now begin to look at the importance of preventing HIV AIDS so that we are able to reduce the burden on the government and on spending on managing the illness or the disease once it comes into play. Number two is to ensure more efficiency in the agencies. Because it's almost, in quote, free money or money that's coming from AIDS, a lot of, largesse or sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, oversight of how the money is spent to be prudent isn't done. And so now that it's coming from home funding, domestic funding, we're going to now see more prudent ways of spending the money and ensuring that only what is most needed is provided for. Number three would then be the PPP, private-public partnership. We'd need to see more investment, especially by private organizations, and perhaps incentives for them to contribute to the fight against HIV and AIDS. In the past, before 2003, when USAID, PEPFAR came into play, we used to manage it by ourselves in terms of domestically, especially with the huge support of private organizations. So this would then be a call for a lot of private organizations to begin to align perhaps their annual CSR towards addressing this issue of HIV AIDS, funding that sector. These are some of the things that we must begin to look at. But it's a shame and a blessing that it took President Trump's directive for us to begin to look inwards to see that we need to begin to solve our problems ourselves, because we cannot rely on aid forever. If it wasn't Trump, it would have been somebody else. But this is time for us to begin to rethink and become creative in the ways that we're going to raise money to address the funding gaps that this has presented. President Tinubu has made the first effort. 4.8 billion will be allocated, at least in the interim, but not near enough for what has been in the past in addressing this menace.